Nicolas Cage, Ed Harris. This summer, get ready to rock.
Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about The Rock. So why did I want to talk about The Rock today? Well, I kind of want to talk about The Rock every day. This is a movie that I've grown to really love over the years. As I've said on this channel before, I am a massive action movie fan. I grew up with a lot of these 80s and 90s action movies. The Rock, however, was a movie that I came to a little bit later because even from an early age, I was not a big Michael Bay fan. Movies like Transformers, Bad Boys, Armageddon, just to name a few. Never really got into any of those movies. I found them to be kind of, even back when I was a kid, really obnoxious and annoying and loud and overstimulating, and I just wasn't a fan of those movies. I did end up trying to rewatch them when I got a little bit older. Felt the same way, so I really have no urge to revisit those movies again. And I think that's why I kind of put The Rock to the side for the longest time. I'm like, oh, it's a Michael Bay movie. How good can it really be? Well, it turns out really good. So good, in fact, that I end up kind of revisiting this movie every couple of years whenever I'm in the mood for over-the-top, bombastic, but really fun, crowd-pleasing action. And that's what this movie is, and boy, does it deliver all of those qualities in spades. And it's interesting, the reputation and legacy that this movie has garnered. It has kind of garnered the reputation of being, it's the one really good Michael Bay movie. And I'm not the only one who shares that opinion. Even Roger Ebert, who is a critic who has been very harsh on Michael Bay's movies in the past, he very famously gave Armageddon just 1 star and listed it as one of his most hated movies. He gave The Rock nearly a perfect review and said it's a wonderfully well-made, exciting, awesome, fun action movie.
But Roger, weren't you worn out by this?
No,
you know what? You don't even know what I'm referring to.
I was stimulated by it. I was excited by it. I enjoyed it. It moved. It was efficient. It was entertaining.
And I couldn't agree more. But before we dive deep into what makes this movie so awesome, for those who may not have seen this movie, let's give a brief overview of what the plot to this movie is about. So the entire premise of The Rock is based around General Francis Hummel, a character who is played by Ed Harris, a disillusioned U.S. Marine general who is fed up with the way his government has treated him, with the way his government has treated his soldiers who have died, as if they're just useless, expendable pawns. And he has reached a breaking point, and now he believes he has to do something drastic in order to not only get the respect that he and his men deserve from the government, but also getting the right compensation to the families who have suffered as a result of this. Wanting to get $100 million from the government and be donated to the families of these soldiers. He gets a team of ex-Marines, such as himself, who are essentially mercenaries now, to steal government chemical warheads that are very nasty and deadly, go to The Rock, the Alcatraz, which is now a tourist attraction, take the tourists inside hostage as collateral, and set up the missiles, and if their demands are not met, they will send those missiles into San Francisco, killing roughly around 80,000 innocent civilians. So right off the bat, the premise to The Rock is pretty different from most other action movie premises, especially around this time, where our bad guys aren't super bad. Well, I mean, they are bad. I guess what I mean is, Ed Harris's character is already kind of a sympathetic villain in that, he's an ex-Marine. He has all of the proper credentials. He sacrificed his life for this country, and what he got in return was no less than a big fuck you from our American government. So right off the bat, it's like, I can see where this character is coming from, and that gives him kind of a moral complexity than most villains do in these types of action movies, and Michael Bay action movies included. And then when you combine that aspect with the fact that Nick Cage's character, who is Stanley Goodspeed, an FBI agent who specializes in chemicals, and he's kind of a scientist book nerd, he is not your average action hero archetype at all. He's very nerdy. He's very funny, kind of goofy, kind of nervous individual. It's a very classic Nick Cage performance. A lot of the things that us Nick Cage fans, of which I am a massive Nick Cage fan, whenever you're in the mood for a Nick Cage performance, it's really kind of over the top and bombastic and kind of silly. This is definitely one of his best performances that delivers on all of those notes that you would want to see.
Most of the time I work in a glass jar and lead a very uneventful life. I drive a Volvo, beige one. But what I'm dealing with here is one of the most deadly substances the earth has ever known. So what do you say you cut me some friggin' slack?
He's an interesting action hero in that he's really not an action hero at all. He's kind of an accidental action hero who's forced in this situation due to his knowledge of chemicals in order to go into the rock and prevent these warheads from going off. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic as well. And then, of course, we get the other main character in this movie, John Mason, played by the great Sean Connery, and what is probably his last truly great movie. It's certainly one of my favorites of Sean Connery's later era. It should be said, because if I don't say it, it'll be thrown in my comments a million times. There's a very popular fan theory with this movie, The Rock, in that Sean Connery's character, who is a former SAS soldier and MI6 agent, is James Bond. You know, it's one of those theories where I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting to think about, and you can have fun with that theory while watching the movie. But it's also one of those theories where when you compare James Bond's character, or specifically Sean Connery's version of James Bond, and you know that character's background and you know his timeline and you compare it with John Mason's character's background in the timeline, there's a lot of inconsistencies that don't really add up. And then once you start examining the theory under a microscope, it kind of starts to fall apart. I don't subscribe to that fan theory at all. I think it's kind of silly that some people take it as seriously as they do. But regardless, watch this movie however you want. If you want to think he's James Bond and that adds to your level of enjoyment, that's fine. Personally, it takes away from my enjoyment. I'd rather view this character as John Mason and not Sean Connery James Bond, because I absolutely adore Sean Connery James Bond, and I think those characters should be separate. With that tangent out of the way, John Mason is the only man, at least in the context of the film, to successfully break out of Alcatraz. And because of that, he's now being taken out of imprisonment that the government has held him in for like 30 some odd years. And they're offering him a deal for his freedom to help Stanley Goodspeed and their team of soldiers to go in there to stop Ed Harris and his crazy, unhinged mercenary team and save the lives of the 80,000 civilians in San Francisco. That's the entire premise of the film. The movie's actually well directed, which is surprising for a Michael Bay movie. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of crazy action that's over the top, and the movie moves at a very fast pace, but it does feel somewhat more restrained and more focused than Michael Bay's other action movies, or at least the ones I've seen. I haven't seen all of his movies, but I've seen all the main ones that some people really love that I really can't stand. The tone of the movie is also really well balanced in that the film knows when to take itself seriously, it knows when to have fun. All of the comedic elements in this movie really work for me, where in movies like Transformers, and especially the Bad Boys movies, the comedy comes off as really asinine, really juvenile, and just really bad. I don't have that problem with the humor in The Rock at all. I think it's fun. But of course, where this movie really shines is with its action sequences. The action in this movie is frankly phenomenal, and it makes some of even today's action movies look lame by comparison. It is so over the top, but it's like so visceral because the action is all practical. Real explosions, real car chases, real car wrecks, real guns with blanks being fired, real stuntmen doing crazy stuntmen shit. Because this movie is very grounded in the way that it was filmed and the action was done practically speaking, this film has aged so fucking well. And the only other modern action movie that I can think of that kind of has the same type of vibe was Top Gun Maverick, which is, you know, Jerry Bruckheimer produced the original Top Gun, he produced this movie, so it makes sense that Top Gun Maverick wanted to get that same tone. And it's just a fun, crowd-pleasing experience similar to that of Top Gun Maverick, where the characters are likable, the movie ends in a way that's pleasant and wraps up our story nicely. It's the type of feel-good ending that you get in this action movie that makes you want to revisit it time and time again. It's a fun action movie that just leaves me really excited and smiling every time I see it. And it should also be noted that Nick Cage would go on to make 2 other iconic 90s action movies with Con Air and Face Off. In fact, he made The Rock, Con Air, and Face Off essentially back to back. Those 3 movies came out within a span of 2 years. It's the unofficial Nick Cage action trilogy, and you best believe I will talk about those movies on the channel because I love them dearly. The Rock still might be my favorite, but I'll have to rewatch the other 2 and see, because they're all like basically tied in terms of entertainment quality. But that's my thoughts on The Rock, guys. I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this movie? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What are some of your favorite 90s action movies? Mention them in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.